In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front brakes on this Mazda 6. Let's install these TRQ brakes. Use a 21mm socket and remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Before I disassemble anything, I personally like to squish the caliper in just a little bit with a pry bar or a screwdriver. This gives us a little bit of extra slack here on the caliper piston so we can more easily remove the caliper. Speaking of, use a 14mm wrench or socket and remove the 2 slider pin bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. Once you break one free, break the other one free. These should not be very tight. Remove them both. Remove the caliper. Set it up on the knuckle here where it will not put pressure on the brake hose. Remove the pads. You may or may not need a pry bar to help you pop them out. Use a 17mm socket and remove both of these caliper bracket bolts that hold it onto the knuckle. There's one. Leave it in a few threads so it can hold the bracket for you while you remove the top one. Remove the bracket. Remove the rotor. Mine is stuck. I'm going to put a lug nut back on and tap it from the back side. The lug nut is going to prevent it from falling off when it does break free. There we go. Remove the safety lug nut. Remove the rotor. Next, you want to clean off the hub surface. You want to have a nice flat surface for the new rotor to mount, especially right here where the old one was seized. Get all this rust and buildup off of here. You can use a wire brush. If your condition is more severe, you can use something to sand it down. But whatever you do not remove material off of the hub. You just want to create a flat surface for the new rotor. If you remove material and make it uneven, the rotor will not sit flat. Rinse it off with brake parts cleaner. Now apply a thin coating of anti-seize on the hub so that it doesn't rust in the future. Make sure you don't get too much on the lug studs. If you do, just wipe it off. I'm going to put my rotor on backwards now, and I'm going to clean it with brake parts cleaner just a little bit. I want to get any oils and fingerprints off of this surface. Now, once it's clean, flip it over, install it the right way. Do the same on the front side. There we go. At this point, if you wanted to, you can put a lug nut on here. That'll hold it on, or just leave it like this until the caliper goes on. With your caliper bracket on a workbench, remove the anti-rattle clips. Sometimes you might need a little screwdriver to pry them off if they're stuck. Take both of them off. With those off, you can see that there's some rust built up here. I'm going to scrape the main chunks of it off and then use a wire brush to brush the rest of it. Now, if yours is in extremely poor condition, you're going to want to use some sort of a sanding disc and sand this down. However, if you don't need to, don't use that because you will be removing material that is supposed to stay here. All you want to do is remove the rust. You want a clean surface for the new anti-rattle clips to mount on. If you don't clean enough, pads actually don't have enough space here and they'll get jammed instead of moving freely and you'll have braking issues. If a wire brush is doing the trick for you, just continue with that. That's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is apply a very thin layer of silicone paste. This is high temperature rated silicone paste for brakes. You can use brake grease if that's what you have, but no matter what you use, you want a very thin layer. Otherwise it'll actually squish out onto the rotor in the middle here once you put the anti-rattle clips on. This looks pretty good right here. So take your new anti-rattle clips. Make sure you have the right one. They're directional. And once you slide them over, they should sit right down into place, clip on nice and flush. Do this to both sides, of course. Just like so. If they don't go on smoothly, you might need to clean some more. Now flip this over and do the same over here. Now let's clean up the slider pins. Remove the pin from the caliper bracket. If it is seized up, you're going to have to spray some rust penetrant in there. Try to get it unseized. If it won't move, you need a new caliper bracket and new slider pins. This one still has some grease on it. However, it is quite corroded on there, so I'm going to put that through the wire wheel. If you don't have that, take a wire brush or file, whatever you have, but you need to clean this up. If you leave it like this, the boot cannot seal up and water will get in. The rest of the slider pin looks like it's in great shape though, so I'm not too worried about it. The grease was still good, so I'm not going to deeply clean here. If you had a seized slider pin or dried up grease, you'd want to use a bore brush, stick it down in there with some brake parts cleaner, and remove all of the old gunky dried up grease. Once again, I'm going to clean this in the wire wheel and then we'll re-grease this. Another note is I like to do these one at a time because the other side pin actually has a little rubber bushing here. I don't want to mix them up. It's like that for a reason, so I'm going to keep these separate. Add some grease into the boot. This is going to act as a reserve of grease for when the caliper is operating, and I'm going to put the rest on the slider pin. If you put too much on here, it's actually just going to get wiped off as you put it into the boot. So slide it in. Having put grease on the edge of the boot here, it's actually going to get onto the ridge that I cleaned up. Press this in. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of air stuck in here, so what I'm going to do is squish on the boot, press on the pin at the same time. That's going to push out all the excess grease as well as air that's stuck in here. Give this a couple twists, make sure it functions smoothly, and then do the same to the other one right over here. One last thing I want to do here is install the wear indicators on the pads. They're supposed to go at the top of each pad, so this would be the outer pad, and then this is going to be my inner pad. And the reason it's at the top is so that as the rotor spins, it slides on it this way. If it was going the other way, it would break it off. Regardless, with these installed, we can go mount everything on the vehicle. Let's install the caliper bracket, put it over the rotor, line it up with the bolt holes, have a bolt ready, whichever one lines up first, start it in, let go, start in the other one. Make sure these thread on smoothly. You don't want to cross thread these, or if needed, clean up the threads. Snug these up. 80 foot-pounds is the torque for these two bolts. That's one. And two. Now let's install the pads into the caliper bracket. Once again, make sure the wear indicator is on top. This also acts as a spring, so you want to make sure that it's seated properly here. Slide the pads in. You shouldn't have a hard time sliding them in. I mean, put them in at an angle, otherwise they won't really slide in, but to fully seat them, you shouldn't have to press them really hard. If you do, that means that there is too much buildup here and here. You have to clean it more because the pad is getting squished in there. So do the same on the inboard pad. Slide it in at an angle. Once it goes in, you should be able to move it around easily like that. It should not be completely stuck. Seat them up against the rotor. Let's get the caliper ready. Now let's get the caliper piston pushed back in. If yours is in poor condition, replace it. Mine is good, so I'm going to open up the bleeder screw so that we can remove all fluid that is getting pushed back through the bleeder screw, get that piston seated so that we can make space for the newer, thicker pads. Remove the bleeder screw cap. Now use a 10mm wrench, break this bleeder screw free. Hopefully yours isn't seized or clogged. I'm going to install this receptacle that's going to get the fluid pushed through it as I squeeze the piston in. I'm going to use one of the old pads just as a spacer, and then install my caliper depression tool. Now there are different styles that you can use. Doesn't matter which one you use as long as it pushes the piston in. The piston needs to go in nice and smoothly. If it is difficult to press, that means it is seized. Mine pressed in really smoothly, really easily, and it is actually pushed in all the way at this point. As you can see, it's flat, flush with the caliper. So we're good to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give this about 5 to 10 seconds of it sitting like this so it can push any air out if any made its way in. Once that's done, tighten this up. Snug it so no more brake fluid leaks out. Let's clean this off and cap it off. Clean up any residual, that way you don't confuse it for a leak. Cap this off. Let's install the caliper over the bracket. Line it up with the pads. Slide in the 2 mounting bolts. And then Once you get these in, we can tighten them. As you tighten these, if your slider pin starts spinning, especially once you get to the torquing side, you can use a wrench and hold these. You can also use pliers, but try to avoid that because pliers can often pinch the boot and damage it. There we go. This is bottomed out. 25 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these slider pin bolts. Now do the same to the other side. Top off the master cylinder, pump up your brakes, and let's get the wheels on. Master cylinder is located right next to your battery. Remove the cap. You'll see that on it says to add .3 brake fluid, so that's what I'm going to add. I'm going to top it off all the way to the max line. Of course, after I did all brakes, that way it doesn't drain again. And once it's full, go ahead and cap it back off. And there you have it. Let's get the wheel back on. Install all 5 of your lug nuts. Bottom them out in a cross pattern, but also in a cross pattern, you want to torque these to 80 foot-pounds. Once again, 80 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them all. There you have it. Now go ahead and get yourself in alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.